At dawn cycle 0, the galaxy turned its attention to a single platform floating above the amber clouds of Kelt Prime. The structure itself was ancient, older than most empires that now observed it. Forged from laid alien alloys and stabilized by gravity anchors, the Endurance platform had earned a grim reputation. It was not a battlefield. No weapons were fired here. No fleets clashed. And yet, entire civilizations had lost their future on that silent deck. This was where the Kelt Dominion decided who deserved autonomy, and who did not. From the orbital galleries, thousands watched. Military tacticians studied biometric projections. Scientists monitored atmospheric controls and gravitational curves. Diplomats whispered predictions, already calculating treaties that would follow humanity's inevitable failure. At the center of the platform stood a single human, Dr. Elias Mercer. He wore no armor. No exosuit reinforced his frame. There were no visible cybernetic enhancements beneath his sleeves. Just a standard environmental uniform, its seals light and flexible, designed more for comfort than protection. To the Dominion, this alone confirmed every assumption they had made. Humans were biologically inefficient, fragile, short-lived. Their strength, such as it was, came from machines and numbers, not endurance. The Dominion had studied their data extensively. They knew the limits of human muscle density, cardiovascular capacity, and neural stress tolerance. And they had designed this trial accordingly. A low tone reverberated across the platform, the signal that marked the official beginning. Gravity increased by 10%. Mercer did not move. Another increment followed, then another. The deck beneath his boots vibrated as invisible forces pressed downward, testing bone density, joint resilience, and muscular cohesion. Alien observers leaned forward. At this stage, most species showed immediate signs of strain, elevated heart rates, irregular breathing, microfractures in skeletal structures. Some collapsed outright. Mercer merely adjusted his stance, shifting his weight as one might on a gently moving train. Baseline readings are stable, an alien technician reported, confusion evident in her tone. The High Examiner of the Dominion tilted his elongated head. Continue. Atmospheric conditions shifted next. Oxygen concentration dipped below standard galactic norms, fluctuating unpredictably. The air grew thinner, forcing lungs to work harder with each breath. Still, the human did not panic. He exhaled slowly, deliberately, eyes half-lidded. His breathing rhythm settled into something measured and controlled, as if he were following a pattern only he could hear. "This is inconsistent," another observer muttered. His species should be gasping. They did not understand that humans had been adapting to thin air for thousands of years, on mountains, in aircraft, in sealed habitats, and battlefields where smoke and fire stole oxygen without warning. To Mesa, the discomfort was familiar. The platform hummed again. Electromagnetic interference fields activated, designed to disrupt neural signaling and induce disorientation. For many species, this phase marked the beginning of panic. Minds fractured under the sensory assault. Memories blurred. Consciousness faltered. Mercer frowned, not in fear, but mild irritation. He glanced down at the deck, then up at the distant observation ring. "Is it supposed to do that?" he asked aloud. The translation systems hesitated, then relayed his words. A ripple of unease moved through the galleries. He was speaking calmly. No strain colored his voice. No tremor betrayed pain. "How long before collapse?" a Dominion strategist asked quietly. The answer did not come. Mercer lowered himself to the deck and sat cross-legged, resting his hands loosely on his knees. The act alone caused several observers to stiffen. Sitting was not a defensive posture. It was not a survival response. It was casual. "This is unacceptable," a biophysicist whispered. "The stress indicators are not escalating as predicted." The High Examiner's mandibles clicked together, a sign of restrained displeasure. All trials begin the same. Arrogance always precedes failure. Mercer closed his eyes. In his mind, the pressure became background noise. He focused on breath and posture, on muscle alignment and circulation, techniques learned not in laboratories, but in places where endurance meant staying alive long enough to make the next decision. The countdown continued. Cycle after cycle passed, each bringing greater force, harsher conditions, deeper strain. Yet the human remained. Some observers began checking their instruments twice. Others stopped speaking altogether. What unsettled them most was not that Mercer endured. It was that he appeared unconcerned. The Dominion had expected defiance, fear, or collapse. What they had not anticipated was indifference. As dawn light filtered through the clouds below, casting long shadows across the ancient platform, a realization quietly took hold among the watching elite. The trial had begun as designed. But something was already wrong. The human was not reacting the way a subject should. And for the first time in centuries, the Dominion faced an unfamiliar possibility. That the endurance trial was not testing the human. It was revealing the limits of the test itself. The Celt Dominion did not consider itself cruel. From its own perspective, it was efficient. Across centuries of expansion, the Dominion had discovered that open war wasted resources. Fleets consumed energy. Occupations bred resistance. Destruction erased value. Trials, however, solved these problems cleanly. A single representative stood in place of an entire species. If that individual failed, the outcome was decided without bloodshed. The endurance trial was the most decisive of all. It was not meant to test bravery or skill. It tested submission under pressure. The Dominion believed that any species worthy of autonomy would recognize its limits and yield before breaking. Those that endured too long were labeled unstable. Those that collapsed quickly were labeled weak. Either result justified control. This philosophy had shaped the Dominion's rise. Entire civilizations now labored peacefully under Celt oversight, convinced by the logic of trials that resistance was irrational. Humanity, the Council believed, would be no different. From the observation ring, Dominion historians projected archived footage into the air, frozen moments of past trials. Alien champions bent beneath increasing gravity. Some screamed. Others lost consciousness. A few attempted to stand and failed, bones shattering under forces they could not comprehend. Each image was meant to provide context. Each image carried a warning. Dr. Elias Mercer opened one eye and glanced upward. His gaze lingered on the holograms without visible emotion. To the Dominion, that lack of reaction signaled denial. Species often reach this stage shortly before collapse. He does not understand the significance, a cultural analyst noted. He understands, replied a military observer. He simply has not failed yet. The Dominion's mistake lay not in their data, but in their assumptions. They had studied human biology in isolation, heart strength, muscle density, neural thresholds. What they had not measured was adaptability under prolonged stress. They had not quantified the human capacity to endure discomfort without assigning it meaning. On Earth, endurance was rarely ceremonial. It was practical. Mercer had learned this long before he ever represented his species among the stars. He had worked in environments where pressure did not announce itself with countdowns, where exhaustion accumulated quietly, where decisions had to be made while the body protested every movement. Compared to those experiences, the platform was honest. It pushed openly. The Dominion escalated the trial. Gravity increased another 12%. The deck creaked as stabilizers compensated. Atmospheric density fluctuated in irregular cycles, forcing the lungs to adjust constantly rather than settle into a rhythm. Mercer inhaled, then exhaled, slow and measured. His heart rate climbed slightly, then stabilized. "That is not possible," a physiologist muttered. His cardiovascular system should be approaching failure. The High Examiner watched silently, his attention fixed on a single metric, neural coherence. It remained intact. "Activate cognitive pressure fields," he ordered. Invisible waves washed over the platform, designed to overload sensory processing and fragment concentration. For many species, this phase was unbearable. Minds unraveled even as bodies remained intact. Mercer shifted his shoulders and rolled his neck, easing tension. In the galleries, a quiet unease spread. "He is adapting," someone said. The words carried weight. Adaptation implied learning. Learning implied intent. The Dominion did not like intent. The endurance trial was built on a simple premise: pressure reveals truth. But as the cycles passed, the truth emerging was not what the Dominion expected. Mercer was not revealing weakness. He was revealing familiarity. A junior strategist reviewed historical data rapidly, cross-referencing human records. They evolved on a planet with irregular gravity, unstable climates, and frequent environmental disasters, she said. Endurance may not be exceptional for them. It may be assumed. The High Examiner dismissed the suggestion with a subtle gesture. All species suffer. Humans are not unique. No, the strategist replied carefully. But they may be practiced. Another cycle passed. Mercer's posture remained steady, his breathing even. The biometric displays showed fatigue, yes, but controlled, managed, integrated. He was not resisting the trial. He was negotiating with it. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, observers began to ask the wrong question. Not when would the subject fail, but whether failure was still possible. The endurance trial had always been a spectacle of inevitability. Watching it now felt different. Less like judgment, more like observation. Mercer opened his eyes fully and looked directly toward the High Examiner's position. The distance was vast, the separation absolute, but the effect was immediate. The human was aware of being watched, aware of being measured, and aware that the trial was not merely physical. It was political. Below the platform, the clouds shifted, illuminated by the rising light of Kelt Prime Sun. Above it, the Dominion's confidence began to thin. They had designed a trial to break civilizations. What they were witnessing instead was a species that did not interpret pressure as domination, but as information. And information, in human hands, had a way of changing outcomes. By the 20th cycle, the endurance platform had reached pressure levels that exceeded the safety margins of most known species. The Kelt Dominion knew this. The thresholds were not arbitrary. They were calculated with precision, refined across centuries of trials and conquests. At this stage, even resilient physiology began to show unmistakable signs of failure: microfractures in bone structures, cardiac arrhythmias, cognitive fragmentation. The human displayed none of them. Instead, Dr. Elias Mercer adjusted his footing as the deck subtly shifted beneath him, compensating for another increase in gravitational load. The motion was small, instinctive, and deeply unsettling to the observers who watched it. He moved as if anticipating the shift, a gravimetric analyst said quietly. "That is coincidence," the High Examiner replied, though his attention never left the data streams. But it was not coincidence. Mercer felt the change seconds before the instruments registered it. Years of working in unstable environments had trained his body to sense pressure variations before they became measurable. He did not analyze the sensation consciously. He responded to it. The Dominion escalated again. Gravity climbed to levels that compressed the platform's structural lattice. Reinforcement fields flared, glowing faintly as they absorbed the strain. Atmospheric composition fluctuated in rapid succession: oxygen, nitrogen, trace gases cycling unpredictably to prevent biological acclimation. Several alien observers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few species present could not have survived exposure even at a distance. Mercer's breathing deepened, then steadied. His heart rate spiked briefly, then returned to a controlled rhythm. Muscles tightened, redistributing load across his frame. Pain registered, sharp and immediate, but it did not dominate. Pain, to Mercer, was information. His nociceptive response is active, a neurologist reported. But he is not escalating stress behavior. The statement drew attention. Most subjects attempted to escape pain. They struggled. They panicked. Their movements became inefficient, wasteful. Mercer remained economical. The Dominion activated the disorientation phase. Subtle fluctuations in electromagnetic fields interfered with inner ear balance and spatial perception. The deck appeared to tilt. The horizon shifted. For many species, this triggered vertigo and loss of motor control. Mercer swayed once, corrected, and placed a hand lightly against the deck. "Remarkable," a technician whispered. He recalibrated in under 2 seconds. The High Examiner's mandibles tightened. "He should be deteriorating," he said. "Increase cognitive pressure." The neural interference intensified, designed to flood the brain with conflicting sensory input. Memory recall faltered. Focus dissolved. Subjects often experienced hallucinations at this stage. Mercer closed his eyes. For a moment, observers believed he was finally succumbing. Then the biometric displays stabilized. Neural coherence remained intact. "What is he doing?" someone asked. A human specialist embedded with the delegation answered quietly. "He's narrowing his focus. Reducing input. Humans do that when overwhelmed." The Dominion had not anticipated this response. Their models assumed that increased stimuli produced increased stress. Human neurology, however, allowed for selective suppression. Under pressure, Mercer's mind filtered aggressively, discarding anything that did not serve immediate function. The platform groaned as another increment of gravity engaged. Mercer exhaled through clenched teeth and lowered himself to one knee, not in surrender, but to redistribute force. The move sent a ripple of anticipation through the galleries. "Failure posture," a strategist declared. But Mercer did not collapse. He remained there, balanced, breathing controlled, muscles engaged. After several seconds, he pushed himself upright again. The galleries fell silent. No subject in Dominion records had ever recovered posture at this stage. The High Examiner stared at the data, searching for anomalies, for system errors, for any explanation that did not challenge the trial's authority. "Run a diagnostic on the platform," he ordered. The response came back immediately. All systems operating within optimal parameters. The fault was not in the machine. It was in the assumption. Mesa opened his eyes and glanced toward the distant observers. His expression was focused, alert, and unmistakably aware of their presence. He understood now that this was not merely a test of endurance. It was a statement of dominance. The Dominion believed pressure enforced hierarchy. That pain clarified position. That those who could not endure deserved to be ruled. Mercer disagreed. On Ith, pressure had never been a privilege of the powerful. It was a constant. Shared. Unavoidable. And humans had learned to function within it, not because they were superior, but because they had no alternative. The cycle counter advanced. With each increment, the Dominion's confidence eroded. The endurance trial had reached a point where failure was expected, even required, to preserve its legitimacy. Instead, the human remained. And in that persistence, the Dominion committed its first true miscalculation. They assumed endurance was a finite resource. They had not considered that for humans, endurance was a skill. One that improved under strain. The Dominion had always believed that the mind would break before the body. Muscle could be reinforced. Bone density could be optimized. Even pain could be endured for a time. But cognition, clarity, identity, purpose, those were fragile. Strip them away, and collapse followed inevitably. That belief had conquered dozens of civilizations. It was now turned fully upon the human. The endurance platform shifted into its next phase without ceremony. The transition was silent, invisible, and far more dangerous than the previous escalations. Cognitive pressure fields intensified, layering interference patterns designed to fragment attention and distort perception. Memory recall was disrupted. Temporal awareness blurred. Emotional regulation destabilized. This phase did not crush bodies. It erased certainty. Alien observers leaned forward as biometric overlays reconfigured, highlighting neural activity and psychological stress indicators. At this stage of past trials, subjects typically exhibited panic responses, erratic movements, vocalizations, attempts to escape the platform's boundaries even when such actions were impossible. Dr. Elias Mercer did none of these things. He stood still as the world subtly unraveled around him. The deck beneath his feet seemed to pulse, its surface shifting in ways that defied spatial logic. Sounds echoed when no sound should exist. The horizon bent inward, compressing distance until perspective itself felt unreliable. Mercer closed his eyes. The decision was deliberate. Inside his mind, the interference surged, attempting to flood his senses with contradictory signals. But instead of fighting it, Mercer reduced his engagement. He narrowed his focus inward, discarding extraneous input. Breath, balance, muscle tension, weight distribution. The rest was noise. His sensory intake is declining, a neurologist reported, confusion sharpening her voice. His voluntarily suppressing perception. That should increase cognitive stress, another replied. Not reduce it. Yet the data showed the opposite. Mercer's neural patterns stabilized into a tight, efficient rhythm. Emotional spikes flattened. Stress hormones peaked briefly, then plateaued. His mind was not resisting the assault. It was reorganizing. The Dominion escalated further. Memory destabilization protocols activated, designed to fracture personal continuity. Subjects exposed to this phase often experienced disassociation, forgetting who they were or why they stood there. Identity erosion usually preceded physical collapse. Mercer's jaw tightened. For a moment, observers saw something change. His breathing faltered. His posture stiffened. Neural coherence dipped. "There," a strategist whispered. "We have him." But the moment passed. Mercer anchored himself to something simple and unmovable: purpose. He did not recite names or memories. He did not cling to personal history. He focused on responsibility, the knowledge that his endurance was not his own, that it represented billions of lives watching from a distant, fragile world. The interference pressed harder. Mercer pressed back, not with force, but with acceptance. Pain sharpened. Fatigue deepened. His muscles trembled under sustained load. This was no illusion. The trial was extracting a price. But humans, the Dominion was slowly realizing, had evolved not to avoid cost, but to decide when it was worth paying. He should be exhibiting despair markers, a behavioral analyst said. Instead, he appears resolved. The High Examiner said nothing. He watched the data scroll past, each line undermining doctrines that had stood unchallenged for centuries. The endurance trial was built on predictability, on the certainty that pressure produced submission. Mercer was producing something else: meaning. The platform vibrated as gravity increased again, this time in uneven pulses. The effect was designed to prevent adaptation, constant micro-adjustments that exhausted neuromuscular systems. Mercer staggered one step. The galleries reacted sharply. He steadied himself, knees flexing, spine aligning instinctively. His hands curled briefly, then relaxed. He did not curse. He did not cry out. He breathed. The moment stretched. His efficiency is increasing, a technician reported reluctantly. He is compensating faster with each cycle. That statement carried an implication no one wished to voice. The trial was not degrading the human. It was conditioning him. The Dominion had never encountered a species that treated psychological assault as terrain to be navigated rather than an obstacle to be destroyed. Humans did not perceive suffering as a signal to surrender. They perceived it as data. Mercer opened his eyes. They were clear, focused, aware. He looked toward the distant observation ring, and though the separation was immense, the effect was unmistakable. The human was no longer merely enduring scrutiny. He was returning it. The endurance trial continued, relentless and unyielding. But the imbalance had shifted. What had begun as a demonstration of Dominion superiority was becoming something else entirely, a study in unintended consequences. Pressure without mercy had always broken those beneath it. Until now. Because the Dominion had made a fatal error in its design. They had assumed the human mind sought comfort. They had not accounted for a species that learned to function without it. And as the cycle counter advanced, one truth became increasingly difficult to ignore. The longer the trial continued, the more dangerous the human became. By the time the trial entered its fifth major phase, the atmosphere within the Dominion's observation ring had changed. What had once been confident anticipation had eroded into strained silence. Analysts no longer spoke in predictions. They spoke in probabilities, margins, and contingencies. The endurance trial was no longer proceeding according to established models, and the deviation was widening with each cycle. The Dominion responded as it always had, by increasing complexity. Time distortion fields activated across the platform, creating irregular temporal gradients. To the subject, seconds stretched unpredictably, then collapsed without warning. Movements lost rhythm. Recovery windows vanished. Mental fatigue accumulated faster than the body could adapt. No known species had remained coherent under prolonged exposure to this phase. Dr. Elias Mercer felt the shift immediately. The world around him slowed, then lurched forward. His muscles responded too late, then too early. Breath and motion fell out of alignment. A step taken in what felt like the correct moment landed off balance. He stumbled. The galleries stirred. This was the first visible sign of vulnerability. Mercer caught himself before falling, planting one hand against the deck. His fingers curled instinctively, gripping the textured surface. He remained there for several long seconds, head lowered, shoulders rising and falling. Cognitive fatigue spike detected, a technician reported. Temporal disorientation is taking effect. The High Examiner leaned forward. Maintain pressure. The distortion intensified. Time fractured. Moments dragged endlessly, then snapped forward without transition. Mercer's internal sense of duration unraveled. Fatigue compounded not because of exertion, but because recovery no longer aligned with effort. This was not pain. This was exhaustion without relief. Mercer's thoughts slowed. Focus blurred at the edges. For the first time since the trial began, he felt something close to danger, not of collapse, but of miscalculation. He lowered himself carefully to the deck and Saturday. The movement was controlled, intentional. A murmur rippled through the galleries. He has assumed a rest posture, a strategist said. Failure may be imminent. The High Examiner did not respond. Mercer rested his forearms on his knees and let his head tilt slightly forward. His eyes closed. Several observers stiffened. No subject has ever rested during time distortion, a scientist whispered. Sleep should be impossible. But Mercer was not attempting full sleep. He entered micro-rest. On Earth, humans had learned to extract recovery from moments measured in seconds, on long missions, in disaster zones, in environments where continuous rest was a luxury. The body, when trained, could recover in fragments. His breathing slowed. Heart rate dropped marginally. Neural activity shifted, not downward, but inward. The biometric displays struggled to interpret the change. His disengaging, someone said. No, the human specialist replied quietly. His optimizing. The Dominion had designed the trial to deny rhythm. Mercer created his own. Time distortion continued to churn around him, but its impact dulled. The exhaustion did not vanish, but it became manageable. His body reclaimed efficiency in small, stolen increments. The High Examiner's claws tightened against the armrest. This should not be possible, he said. But it was. The human mind, under sustained pressure, had chosen adaptation over resistance. Several cycles passed. Mercer stared, rolled his shoulders, and opened his eyes. He rose to his feet with deliberate care, testing balance, re-establishing orientation. The galleries fell silent. He recovered, a technician said. Neural fatigue indicators have decreased. A senior strategist exhaled slowly. The trial is reinforcing his endurance. The implication hung heavy. Every escalation was making the human more capable. The Dominion had always believed that pressure exhausted finite reserves. They had never encountered a species that treated endurance as a renewable resource, one replenished through discipline, experience, and controlled recovery. Mercer stood fully upright. His posture was not defiant. It was steady. He looked outward, not at the data or the platform, but at the observers themselves. There was no challenge in his gaze. No triumph. Only awareness. The High Examiner felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest cavity. Concern. The endurance trial was meant to demonstrate inevitability. It had always been a one-sided equation. Pressure applied. Subject failed. Dominion ruled. Now the equation was changing. Pressure applied. Subject adapted. An adaptation, once it reached a certain threshold, could no longer be controlled. The trial continued, but its purpose had blurred. What was meant to display dominance was now exposing vulnerability, not in the human, but in the Dominion's doctrine. Small victories accumulated. A step recovered. A breath steadied. A moment of rest stolen from chaos. Each one insignificant alone. Together, they formed something the Dominion had not prepared for. Confidence. And confidence, when paired with endurance and intelligence, was a dangerous combination. As the cycle counter advanced, a quiet realization settled over the observation ring. They were no longer watching to see when the human would fail. They were watching to see what he would do next.